Happy Sunday evening, and it's time for another ghost story, shall we? I do want to thank you all for voting on the poll that basically is deciding what our programming is going to be. I suggested John Dillinger. One of you suggested Diana of the Dunes for the letter D in our A to Z paranormal podcast broadcast challenge, and you guys won. The Saturday night votes, the viewers that night, or the pollsters, the voters last night, put John Dillinger in a strong lead, but the Sunday morning crowd came out in force and brought Diana of the Dunes to prominence, which forced me to do one very important thing: learn about Diana of the Dunes, something that I grew up having always heard that phrase, that there's a ghost story that takes place along the Lake Michigan coast in northern Indiana, but I really didn't know too much about it. But again, uh, starting out, this is What's Your Ghost Story. What'syourghoststory.com is the website. And this is really all about community, about sharing stories. So I want to start out with the comment of the day, as we're going to do in all of these moving forward. And I had a couple of interesting comments come up kind of recently. Well, actually, one was about a year ago, and another was tacked on just recently on a video about the Sunnybrook Asylum, which is one of the scariest places I've ever been in my life, and it doesn't exist anymore. Unfortunately, it was in Fox Lake, Illinois, Ingleside, more specifically. And this was it started out as a commune, a spiritualist utopia type of place, and I think over the years that property sat vacant for a bit, and then perhaps housed, well, not perhaps, it housed a tuberculosis sanitarium later on, and somewhere along the way it got very dark, very very dark, and that's that. Then it sat vacant. There were a number of buildings on the property, caretakers' houses, and a very long, narrow structure that I believe was the main. There was a huge house once upon a time, back in its glory days, but then this other house that did seem like it made sense for a sanitarium. There were small room after small room, almost like cells, but they were probably housing sick people. And this place, it's Northern Illinois. It's so far from any major media that a lot of information is lost about it. So there is information out there. There's especially about the original proprietors, the people that built it. The Spirit Fruit Society was the name of the utopian society. But so we have a woman named Jennifer Matt who said she grew up right down the road, lived on Converse Lane. Now, this was the 70s and 80s. Teens were constantly driving down that abandoned road to check out the creepy asylum. I was terrified, but never got too close. I did see flashing lights from one of the buildings and ran like the chicken I am. Halloween was always a time to visit with my brothers, taking their friends down there. They did have a caretaker for a while who would mow the lawn and always chase people away. Not sure exactly when that stopped. So it's always great to get that kind of firsthand. This is somebody that was there. They grew up in the area. You get a better feel for really what this place was like kind of in the in-between times, when it wasn't inhabited. And just recently, Cindy Collins chimed in. I also grew up on Converse Lane, and we would play baseball in the neighborhood with the kids on the asylum property. The caretaker would keep the grass short so we could play ball. And on occasion, if we begged him enough and frequently enough, he would take us on a tour of the building every couple of years. It was spooky, but awesome at the same time. We used to ride our bikes around the grounds and some of the outbuildings. We would hear radios playing loud. We were always afraid that there were people inside, so we would quickly run due to fear. And then that, again, that just throws an image in your mind. Those are the Stranger Kids things. Stranger Things kids. So this is when I put my book together, Voices from the Chicago Grave. These were the incredible moments that led to more and more good information. I'm going to drop a line to those people, and of course, thank them for sharing their memories of the site. Only one of them may have had a ghost story, but they were there. They saw this place when it still existed. I went there in the 1990s and early 2000s when most of the buildings were still left, but totally falling apart. And again, now they're gone. Now it's a subdivision progress. But who knows? Maybe one of them has, they can refer me to somebody else that was there. Maybe some of them have photos from back in the day. I'd love to see stuff like that. And so that's What's Your Ghost Story is all about: building the community, sharing stories. And I want to give a quick shout out before I forget because I've been forgetting it every day so far, to the See You on the Other Side podcast. Now, they were the ones, with the help of Chuck C.E. Martin, who came up with the idea to enact this. Now, this was already going on. The A to Z challenge.com is a thing that's been going on for 10 years, I think. But for us to get actively involved in it was his idea. And they got started a little bit before I did. So I just want to run down what you can see over at othersidepodcast.com/blog. And there's A through F. They're a little bit further along. Alma, which is a name for Bigfoot. The Buried Bosnian Pyramids, Curses, Demons, Evil Eye, and Fairies. So you see they're casting so far a wider paranormal net, and covering some more diverse topics. Hopefully we'll dip into some of that other more out there fun stuff too. But for now, we are sticking with a ghost story. Now, again, like I said, I grew up, I was hearing the phrase Diana of the Dunes, not knowing what exactly that was. Sounded like some scary thing. I was thinking more that it was going to be Resurrection Mary-ish, or even more legendary, perhaps some Native American association, or some mythical goddess-like thing, which now I see why I was maybe given some of those impressions. But at the end of the day, we know a fair amount that this is not as mysterious an entity than that. But because here she is. This is Diana, which that is not her name. That is a name the press gave her. She was, I gotta grab her name right now on a different, I meant to write something down over here. Diana was not her name. And that's, going back to the great days of press, where they would just find something. Well, what sells? What's a marketable phrase that we could use? Alice Gray was her name. But, much like the Black Dahlia. What does Dahlia have to do anything? Well, there's a movie that was out at that time. Alice Mabel Gray was her full name. There we go. The Black Dahlia was a popular movie out at that time. And then at the same time that this woman gets killed in 1947. So let's build off of that. And now this poor victimized woman, this murder victim, is the Black Dahlia, not just what her actual name is, Elizabeth Short. So who was this woman? And this is kind of funny because I think in a way, there is a little bit of a connection to the word Diana, the name Diana. Nothing at all in her family. She was never called Diana until the press began to call her Diana. But it's interesting because I think she lived this reclusive life, living like a hobo, if you will, like a recluse, on the Indiana shores, in Indiana Dune National. I don't know if it wasn't national park at the time, but now it is a park. And she just kind of got out of society and stayed quiet and closed and secluded. And I think a lot of us, even to this day, project what we want her to be. Because when you're reading the stories, and I read a lot about her today, from historical newspapers through a whole bunch of different write-ups, through even, paranormal groups that are going out looking for her and what their version of the story is. And some of them are completely at opposite ends of each other. Some people say that, well, everybody says she is from Chicago originally. Most people say that she grew up in a very affluent family with a father who was a doctor, and one way or another spurned Chicago city life to go live out in nature. Some people say it was a really, really bad breakup, and she just kind of had a little bit of a breakdown and went to go find herself. Some people said that she was at work, she had a great job, but her eyesight started to go and she could no longer keep up with the day-to-day activities. So this is what she did. This is what she could do. And there are others, which is so funny because these are so diametrically opposed. One says she had this great job within the University of Illinois at Chicago, but she resigned in protest over differences in the wage gap, that men were getting paid this much more for the same job. So she protested the whole thing and went off to live on her own. And another one says she couldn't find a job anywhere, so she had to go live out here, homeless. Completely different. So one, she's a feminist icon, and one, she's doing what she can to survive, which hey, no problem with that. And of course, people herald her as this great naturalist as well, because she lived out in nature. Who knows if she was trying to take any stand? Maybe she just liked it out there. We do know, we'd always heard all these stories agree that she went there with her family as a child, and that's a place that she was happy, younger. So she wanted to return to that place. Whatever the case, this woman lived out in this fishing shanty And here's a photo of her near one of her shacks. She lived in two different shacks over the years. She lived out there a long time, very isolated, and by all accounts was happy. Here's the look at that beautiful Gary, Indiana. Even still, the smokestacks have never stopped. They've only multiplied. Uh, and well, one of the things this is the early 1900s is what we're talking about there. I believe it was the 19 teens that she took up residence. She was born in the late 1800s. I think it was actually I have it right here. She was born in 1881, and she did one of the most scandalous things anybody could imagine. After the sun went down, when she was out there alone, she would skinny dip. Heaven help us. And a time or two, some late night fishermen would happen to notice this, and then word spread. And I think this is why we still know about her today, because sex appeal works everywhere, even in ghost stories. The fact that there was this woman that's living kind of mysteriously, and she would go out skinny dipping at a time where that was completely scandalous. She could be burned at the stake, and just a couple years earlier, legally, I think, that would lead to things like this. This is a Ripley's Believe It or Not used to have a series that ran kind of like a comic strip in newspapers. Here's one from 1978. The Ripley's Believe It or Not about this hippie, the 1915 hippie. Alice Mabel Grave, Chicago, daughter of physician, quit her job, lived in a squatter shack in Indiana, and was arrested for swimming nude in Lake Michigan. Ripley's Believe It or Not. That'd be a great Ripley's Believe It or Not one. Not everything in here is always true. Very frequently, Mr. Ripley he was a showman. So he built things up and made it more eye catching. I don't think she was ever arrested. So she was living out there peacefully, happily with nature. She liked the solitude, the quietness of living out there on the sand dunes. She said that she went out there with just a handful of items: a jar, a couple of guns, a fork, and a knife. I think it was something that bare bones, that she would go out and gather her own fish. She would catch fish and sell them to the different fishermen around. That was kind of how she brought in some income. And she would go to the nearby library and learn more about how to live in nature, live on your own, how to forage for food, and this, that, and the other. Everything seemed to be okay until she met a man named well, this is funny. So this I shouldn't say funny. This is unfortunate. This is sad. She met a guy who was no good for her. And what I was going to say is funny is that one of these write-ups I read said that it was a Native American person. Upon further research, I found out that this guy had the very traditional Native American name of Paul Wilson. And this is him right here. And you can't see it. It's cut off right here. But this is him after some sort of an altercation with someone where he was shot in the foot. Our lovely Diana, Alice, was pistol whipped. She suffered a fractured skull, so she was near death actually when this happened, but she did survive. She made a recovery. But he was nothing but bad news. By all accounts, he beat her. And I think she may have liked her loneliness, but solitude can only go so far, perhaps. So she had a companion. She had some companionship, but he was not a good person at all to her, and apparently kept her under thumb. Eventually, some people walking around the Indiana dunes came across the charred remains of a murdered individual. We have no idea who this. I don't think we even know who this was, but we definitely don't know who was the murderer. But fingers began to point towards Paul. He was questioned, but there really was no evidence tying him to the slaying. So whoever did the murder got off scot-free. Now, Alice did end up passing away in 1925. It was a kidney infection, but it's possible that it was a kidney infection in the sense that Houdini died with some internal bleeding, internal issues, because it's possible that Alice here was beat up and her body just couldn't take the punishment anymore. Sadly as it is. And a really interesting thing as well. Again, we're talking about urban legends. This everything I'm saying is true, and of course, I'm giving the variations of the stories as well. But when it comes to something so legendary as Diana, and again, the press, I was going to circle back to why the press called her Diana, in addition to selling papers, was there's a goddess named Diana who is the goddess of hunting and the moon, which just kind of fit very well for her. So I get it. You're clever, but her name was Alice, and nobody really knows her as Alice anymore. Uh, there are so many different documents that talk about that where Diana was buried. Sorry, now I did it. Where Alice was buried. Many say that she was buried in one of the dunes out there. She wanted to be cremated, but that didn't happen. Her wish to be cremated was not fulfilled. She was buried in one of the dunes. We don't know which one. It's lost. Another one, and this is funny because this is on the actual park website, duneslearningcenter.org, says her body was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Gary, Indiana. Well, here is her grave. This is in, I think it's Oak Lawn Cemetery in Gary, Indiana. So she is buried in Gary, Indiana. It is not, and it says Diana of the Dunes right across the top. There is one inaccuracy. She was born in March, not November, like that says. But so her burial site is known. Now, this is interesting. Has anybody gone and investigated at her burial site? That would be something interesting to do, because apparently she is seen all over the Indiana Dunes Park area. People say they see a nude woman, the phantom of a nude woman walking around the shoreline, going into the water, swimming, walking along the woods, just like she would have done in life. And it does make sense. If this is the one place she found happiness as a child, the reason she came back. Now, sadly, while she lived there, she met her demise. But if she could go anywhere in death, the way she went anywhere she wanted to in life, she would go back there. I totally see that. The fact that the story is so celebrated and remembered is still remarkable to me, simply because it's not nearly as dramatic as so many other ghost stories are. You have to keep coming back to the fact that she was seen skinny dipping back in the early 1900s, and now people claim to see her nude form walking around. I have an article pulled up in front of me from the South Bend Tribune in 1963, and construction or renovations, that kind of thing, whether it's a house or a natural area, sometimes stirs up activity. And in 1963, they were digging through the dunes, making way. I'll just read it here. Let's see. Again, this is 1963. Diesel bulldozers are tearing up the giant sand hills, and Diana, who haunted them years ago, has plenty to howl about. It's almost as if she was here, admitted one uneasy dipper. Now, dipper is a type of fishing. Kind of eerie here at night, like maybe she was watching, with the wind carrying on like that. Diana, a Lake Michigan legend, repeatedly buried in one of these dunes, being leveled for the Deepwater, Indiana port site. The story goes that for years her spirit roamed the once vast, desolate place. And it goes on and on about the construction. But interesting, 1963, they were still getting the information wrong that she's buried in one of the dunes. But that is the story of Diana of the Dunes. I have never visited that site. I've got no excuse. It is along the coast of Lake Michigan, about 20 miles as you curve around from Chicago, going through Indiana, going back up north to Michigan. It's about 20 miles away from Michigan. So that would be a great place to visit and do a little research. I know a lot of people have gone ghost hunting there, investigating. I haven't heard or come across too many interesting bits of evidence. If you have anything, if you used to camp out there, what I hear is that it was a very common place for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts camps to go sleep out overnight for the weekend, and of course tell some ghost stories around the campfire. And maybe that's why this story has lived on so long. So many generations and generations of kids growing up knowing that story. I, as always, would like your help. Send me suggestions for the letter E, which I will cover tomorrow night. Right now, I'm thinking Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, but I don't have a second option yet. So write on in. And I wanted to mention and thank Lisa Van Buskirk, who suggested dungeons for the letter D. We did not end up picking it, but that is a really fascinating one. I don't know enough about it. I would have spent a week at least learning about the haunted dungeons over in Europe, but that's talk about a good topic for next year. Thanks for watching. Visit whatsyourghoststory.com. Follow us on all of the social media platforms, and head over to facebook.com/whatsyourghoststory to suggest what topic we should cover for the letter E. Thanks for watching.